Here we go. Buddhism. We're doing something new, folks. You guys ever studied anything about Buddhism before? World history class chat. You guys ever studied Buddhism? What's Buddhism all about? If I asked you, what is Buddhism? What would you say? What comes to mind?
Meditation.
Meditation. Religion from Asia. That's good. As you're thinking about it, I'll show you the Temple of Enlightenment. Has anybody been here before? I know you're all mostly first-year students. Enlightenment. So this is in the Bronx, 231st Street. Is that far away from us? What street are we at? What street is the train station? 242nd Street, right? So this is 10 blocks. 10 blocks south of us. It's very close. It's a little bit like tucked away. You have to kind of look for it in order to find it, but it's very, very close. Obviously now is pandemic times, and so field trips are not really an option, but you know, the day will change eventually where maybe you can go to a Buddhist temple again. And there's one just down the street from us. So you can tell from the top Chinese characters, right? So it's kind of in a Chinese tradition. But actually the monks who are there are from Sri Lanka, or at least the ones who were there a couple years ago when I first went there. So it goes to show it's a we could say an Asian tradition. I think somebody already said that, didn't they? Yeah, religion from Asia. So South Asia, we already saw Sri Lanka, India on the map, but also East Asia, Japan, China, Vietnam, and many other places too. Are there gods in Buddhism? That's a great question, Angel. Are there gods in Buddhism? What do you guys think? Maybe I'll ask you, Angel, what are you thinking about? What made you ask that question about God? It's actually kind of a tricky question. Harrison doesn't think that there are. Other thoughts? Gods in Buddhism? Lauren, what do you think? Okay, so if you couldn't hear, Lauren was thinking, you know, in Hinduism, you've got all the gods, right? Gods all over the place. For example, Agni on the exam, what is he the god of? He's the god of fire, right? One of a tricky question that I took a point off for almost all of you is Dharma, Artha, and Kama were gods, right? They're gods up in the sky. They're hanging out with Indra, who's another god. Brahma is another god, right? There are all these gods in Hinduism. So coming back to Angel's question, maybe I guess he didn't elaborate on it, but I imagine what he's thinking is like, well, is Buddhism a religion, right? Because, you know, Hinduism's clearly a religion. They've got all these gods, beliefs, myths, all that sort of stuff. Christianity, they've got at least one God, right? We talked about polytheism, monotheism. And so if we're thinking, is Buddhism a religion? It might come down to this question, right? Are there gods? So what do you guys think? Is Buddhism a religion?
Yes.
So it's actually sort of a tricky question, right? If your definition of religion is gods, if there are gods, yes, religion. If there are no gods, no religion. Then Buddhism is sort of a weird category. But Lauren clearly did the reading, and there are a bunch of different sides to religion. And I see people writing in all caps that Buddhism is a religion. Isn't the Dalai Lama like a deity to them? It is a religion. So I can't trick you guys. So you already know. Some people might say it's more like a philosophy or way of life, something like that, right? And that, of course, all showed up in the reading. And one thing that I will stress in this class is that, yes, it is. Buddhism is a religion. There are gods. In fact, the Hindu gods are in Buddhism. I know that might be confusing, but if you think about Judaism, Christianity, Islam, they share a God, don't they? Yeah, so it shouldn't be too surprising that different religions actually share the same gods. There's something similar happening between Buddhism and Hinduism. Daniel's asking about the Dalai Lama. That's actually something I know a lot about. Very simply put, yes, he is almost like a deity. He is a bodhisattva, which we'll learn about, I believe, next class. Bodhisattva. Although we can talk about that word today. So yeah, the Dalai Lama is seen as a very, let's just say, wise or maybe even enlightened person. And so when people encounter him, they have a lot of respect. You guys know where the Dalai Lama is from? Where's he from? Tibet. Yes, exactly. And I think maybe the first day of class, I already told you this, but I speak Tibetan, I read Tibetan. This is like what I know the best. I used to live in China and live with Tibetan communities. So this is my jam. And yeah, so the Dalai Lama is indeed Tibetan. All right, well, let's keep going. So it's not to say there is no philosophy in Buddhism. There is. It's not to say that Buddhism is not some sort of way of life or code of ethics. It is also that, but it is also a religion. And I would argue philosophy, way of life are part of almost every religion. You know, maybe some emphasize some things more than others. So one way we can think about this is the story of the blind man and the elephant. And I think this is actually a very useful story in terms of just how to think about religions, how to think about the world, honestly. Maybe I can just ask you guys to tell me what you see here. What's going on in this image? Can you make sense of this? So this is a Japanese image. Again, it goes to show, even though this is kind of an Indian story, this is a Japanese image. India and Japan are pretty far away from each other. You guys aware of that? Right?
All of the men are trying to push the cow. I thought it was a cow. The elephant in different directions.
Okay, so we've got some men and an elephant. I don't know if they're trying to push the elephant, though. What are they doing? Subduing an elephant. Interesting choice of words there. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Aista, Lauren basically said the same thing at the same time. They look like they're messing with him. Yeah, so really the secret to this story is, what are the blind men doing? And so as you can tell from the title, all these men are blind. I don't know if you can see it in their eyes. Their eyes look pretty closed. That guy looks like maybe he's trying to open them. I don't know. But yeah, so Lauren said it. Aista wrote it nicely. They're feeling different parts of the elephant. They're trying to figure out what it is, right? And so the metaphor right now, well, I guess we'll get to the metaphor in a minute, but what Kyon is talking about is, we and our study of Buddhism, we are very much like these blind men and the elephant. They're blind and they're trying to figure out what they're feeling, right? Yeah, because if you're blind, you can't see. So you got to feel your way around. Now, here is a British poem that was inspired by this story. It's by a guy, so this is not from the reading, but it's sort of a nice way to explore this. John Godfrey Saxe. He's a 19th century British person. Why is a 19th century British person talking about Indostan? I guess, first of all, what is Indostan? Can we make sense of that? Does that sound like a river that was on a review sheet kind of recently? The Indus River, yeah. And Stan is at the end of the names of a lot of places, right? Afghanistan, Pakistan, Indostan. So what do you think he's talking about when he says Indostan? Yeah, a certain area along the Indus River Valley, otherwise known as India. Yeah, he's talking about India. So why is the British guy talking about India? It's before India was India, right? I don't know if you guys ever think about this, but the current map of the world is a pretty recent invention and it's constantly changing, right? Countries come and go, maybe not constantly, but it is changing, right? What's an example? I think North Sudan and South Sudan were once all part of the same country. Now they're separate. Is that correct? I'm pretty sure. And for example, Yugoslavia used to be a country, and now it is split up in Eastern Europe into various other places. The USSR, right, used to be a more united nation, and now it's not. Yeah, new countries popping up near Russia, exactly. So anyways, India, before India was India, what was happening in India? So like in the 19th century, again, the 1800s, 19th century, who was in charge in India?
Wasn't it the British?
The British, yeah, the British Empire, colonization by Britain. Yeah, Isa knows all about this, exactly. And so as we study Buddhism, it's important to recognize sort of what the history of this tradition really is all about. So you might have encountered Orientalism, Edward Said. It was just mentioned very briefly. Have you guys ever heard of this guy before? It looks like his name is Said, but it's pronounced Said. Has anybody heard of Said before? So he's an important scholar. He wrote a book called Orientalism. You don't have to worry about those details. Very famous book though, 1978. I was just looking stuff up about this for another purpose, but very famous, very important book. And it's basically talking about how colonialism helps shape the way that people study the Orient, right? And so the Orient, of course, refers to Asia. So anyways, as we look at John Godfrey Sachs and his telling of this story, we have to keep in mind, this is an example of Orientalism, right? We've got a British guy taking an Indian story and kind of making it his own. So let's check it out, shall we?
The Blind Men and the Elephant by John G. Sachs. It was 6 men of Hindustan, to learning much inclined, who went to see the elephant, though all of them were blind, that each by observation might satisfy his mind. The first approached the elephant, and happening to fall against his broad and sturdy side, at once began to bawl, "God bless me, but the elephant is very like a wall." The second, feeling of the tusk, cried, "Oh, what have we here? So very round and smooth and sharp. To me 'tis very clear, this wonder of an elephant is very like a spear." The third approached the animal, and happening to take the squirming trunk within his hands, thus boldly up he spake, "I see," quoth he, "the elephant is very like a snake." The fourth reached out his eager hand, and felt about the knee. "What most this wondrous beast is like is very plain," quoth he, "'tis clear enough, the elephant is very like a tree." The fifth, who chanced to touch the ear, said, "E'en the blindest man can tell what this resembles most. Deny the fact who can? This marvel of an elephant is very like a fan." The sixth no sooner had begun about the beast to grope, than seizing on the swinging tail that fell within his scope, "I see," quoth he, "the elephant is very like a rope." And so these men.
Okay, let's pause for a sec. Okay, so as you can see, it's a nice little poem. What were some of the conclusions that the blind man came to? What did you catch? It was a lot of details, so I'm sure you didn't remember all of them, but since they can't see the whole elephant, they assume that each part of the elephant is something else. They're all wrong because they only describe a specific part of the elephant they are touching. Yes, so Isa's got the moral. What are some things that they confuse the elephant for? So what part do they touch, and what are their conclusions? Which one stuck with you? So for example, one touched the tusk and concluded it was a spear, right? Because it's very pointy. One touched the trunk. The leg is like a tree. Fan, wall, spear, rope. What was the trunk? Yeah, and he rhymed it with spake, right? You get some really nice kind of English pronunciation here. Right, and so again, oh, go ahead.
That they all have different realities, depending on what part of the elephant they touch.
I like that. They all have different realities, different experiences of reality at the very least, right? And so I think you guys already got the moral, so I don't think we necessarily need to,
Have understand, disputed loud and long.
okay, we don't need to belabor that point. Let's see, did I copy it? Yeah, so then at the very end, there's this moral where, okay, I think Simone kind of got us started, of course, Isa as well. What is the point of this story? Now, Sachs applies it to theologic wars, and I think we need to pause with this word theologic or theology. What is theology? You heard of theology before? The study of religion. Yeah, so theology is a lot like religious studies. It's more kind of within the tradition, right? Remember double vision? You can be insider, outsider. Theology is more kind of insider. Religious studies is more outsider. And in this school, you could really get both. You know, a lot of my colleagues are probably better called theologians than scholars of religious studies, but maybe they would argue with me about that. I don't know. Okay, so coming back to this, I'll just read to you. So often theologic wars, the disputants, I ween, rail on in utter ignorance of what each other mean, and prate about an elephant not one of them has seen. So what is he saying? What is Sachs's take on this story? So theologic wars would just be like arguments, right? Arguments.
Neither of them are completely correct.
Mm-hmm. Say it again.
That neither of them are completely correct.
Okay, neither of them are completely correct, but they think they are, right? It's like, hey, I felt his tail. Well, he doesn't know it's a tail. I felt it. This guy is a rope, right? Somebody else comes along and is like, I felt it. This guy is a tree. I felt it. This guy is a spear, right? So they all come up with their own conclusions. They're all kind of right, but they're all kind of wrong. And they become wrong because they apply their very limited experience to an entire tradition. So what does this have to do with religious studies? We do this kind of thing all the time, right? You get one little taste of what a religion's all about, which is kind of what we do in this class, and then apply it to the entire thing and pretend like you actually can represent this whole tradition. And this is what people do with Buddhism across the board, right? So if we want to say Buddhism's more of a philosophy, it is a philosophy for sure, right? That is one part of Buddhism. But does that mean all of Buddhism is a philosophy? No, of course not. So what are some other things? You can kind of look back at the reading and you can get all these different 7 dimensions of religion. It's a great way of thinking about religion. It's also a lot of details that I think we're mostly just going to skip. Because it's, we're going through this very quickly, it's sort of the intro version. We'll cover some narrative today. For example, the life story of the Buddha is a narrative. We'll cover some philosophy, which are kind of the teachings of the Buddha, also ethics. So we'll cover most of these subjects, although we won't necessarily point at them this way. So on page 5, if you're curious, it's kind of a nice way of thinking about religion as this composite of parts, right? Just like the elephant is composed of parts, so too are religions. Okay, so I think you guys seem to already get this. Any questions about Blind Men and the Elephant? Is that pretty clear? What the story is showing, what it's saying? I feel like the story itself is relatively simple, but the interpretation, the implications of it are actually pretty sophisticated, right? And we live in an age where there are a lot of kind of senseless arguments, theologic wars, right? Senseless arguments on the internet about this is good, no, this is bad, no, this, you're an idiot, no, you're an idiot, right? And people just sort of prate along where they're doing something very similar, right? One person is talking about this aspect of a phenomenon, the other is talking about that aspect of a phenomenon, and just really not communicating, right? Have you ever been in an online discussion like this before? They're easy to find if you look for them. Okay, so any questions about the blind man and the elephant? Is that pretty clear? So the other thing I want to get to today is the life of the Buddha. I guess, oh yeah, one more thing before we get there is you might be wondering, okay, so what is this Buddhism thing all about? Well, if you talk to a Buddhist person, they would say there are three things that are really key to Buddhism. They're called the three jewels. I guess I don't need to type this because it's on the slides, but the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And so we will touch on all of these. I guess we could look at a syllabus because we're starting a new section. That's something I like to do with you guys, but I forgot to do it today. So yeah, we just finished 7 weeks, right? That's a lot of work. Now we are in the second half, week 15. We're in week number 8. We're quite literally right in the middle. You guys aware of that? That's kind of exciting. So we're doing early Buddhism. We're doing some Buddhist teachings. Then we'll do this greater vehicle. We'll hear about some monks. Then we'll talk about meditation. And so, there are a lot of, like we just discussed, there are a lot of different aspects of Buddhism we could talk about. As I've told you before, this is really my specialty. I teach an entire course on Buddhism every spring. So we're just getting a little taste. So these first few classes will be mostly lecture kind of style, but then toward the end, it'll be more discussion, talking about meditation and some other things. There'll be a forum post next week, right? So you guys get a week off this week, but then we're back to forum posts next week, and then a week off, and then the exam. So this section, as you can see, is super short. You'll probably finish your later midterms this week, and then start thinking about my midterm again, or our midterm, we should say. But the good news is after that, we'll be done with exams, and then you'll just have a final paper at the end. Is this making you tired, Lauren? Yeah, we talked about how we lost an hour of sleep at the beginning of class. It's a sleepy day. So anyway, so this is what is happening for the rest of the semester. As I told you before, there'll be another book you'll need to get. I'll remind you of this, but we're going to read that book toward the end of class, and then you'll write a paper about it, and then we'll be done. So this is all that's left. It's actually, looking at it this way, it's pretty manageable. Anyways, questions about this? I meant to do this at the beginning of class, but I forgot. This is what is ahead, folks. Okay, so anyways, coming back to the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, we will talk about all three of these things. So the Buddha, you probably know, he's the guy we're talking about today. The Dharma is probably, that's a familiar word. Remember the Dharma? What does Dharma mean? Duty, yeah. So here's a weird situation, because we talked about before, this is a translation of a Sanskrit word. It kind of shifts here. It is duty, right? It's sort of what you're supposed to do. It's the way things are, the way things should be, right? And so in the Buddhist context, it has this new meaning, which is basically like, what are you supposed to do with your life? What is your duty? It's not decided by the caste system anymore. It's not decided by society anymore. What you're supposed to do is follow the Buddha's teaching, right? And try to achieve enlightenment. So it's still the same word. It's still the same concept, but the translation has this kind of a new connotation to it. So you could call it duty. A simpler way to think about it is the teaching, right? We've got Buddha is the teacher, the Dharma is his teachings, and then the Sangha is the community. And again, for Hinduism, Dharma could be teachings, but it's the teachings of society, right? How are you supposed to act in society? And how are you supposed to treat people, and how do you fit into the caste system and all that sort of stuff. The Buddhists throw most of that out, right? The caste system is gone. Buddha doesn't really care about caste anymore. Okay, so let's start with him. Here's an image coming back to Angel's very good question from the beginning of class. We've got this guy in the middle. He's the Buddha. Can you tell what these guys on the side are doing? What are they doing with their hands? They got nice little pot bellies. I love this statue. It's really beautiful. What are these guys doing on the side? Can you tell? They're praying, right? They're kind of bowing their heads down a little bit. Did we talk about what it means when you bow down to somebody? One thing that's significant, whenever you see multiple images in a painting, who is higher, who is sitting in the highest seat, kind of shows they're a bit more important. If you see the Buddha's head is above the head of these two figures. So what impression do you get? What relationship would you say these guys have with the Buddha? showing respect, saying that he is a higher power, a higher person, right? And as we talked about before, in the caste system, that is huge, right? That's a central part of Indian society, is saying who's higher and who's lower, right? To say somebody's higher than you is a very important aspect of Indian society. Now, what if I told you that these were gods? Exclamation point. Right? It was Angel who asked about gods earlier. I want to make sure about that. Let's see. Harris, Angel, Enlightenment, very close. Are the gods? Yeah, it's Angel. So here are the gods from very early on. This statue is like 2,000 years old. I don't give you the date, but it's early Buddhism. So how do we interpret this? Why would the gods ever bow down to the Buddha? And again, these are the same gods. This is Indra and Brahma. These are powerful, amazing gods who can do all sorts of crazy things, like create worlds and they destroy things and transform into all sorts of different stuff. Why would they ever be bowing down to the Buddha? How do we make sense of that? The Buddha is not the creator of the world. That's right. So Lauren put it nicely. She talked about a moral compass, or saying that he's morally above them. And it's sort of a fascinating moment in human history, right? When the gods are sort of taken down a notch. If we compare it to Christianity or Hinduism, right? It's all kind of happening around the same time, around 2,000 years ago, where gods and men are being fused together, right? So what happens in Christianity is God is a man, right? There's the Son of God, but there's the Trinity, and so they're basically kind of part of the same being, right? You can take your 200 level Christianity class about that. In Hinduism, we have the avatar, right? Where the gods are coming down and acting like perfect men. Here in Buddhism, it's something a bit more radical than that. We're putting humans above the gods. How crazy is that? The gods themselves are bowing down to the Buddha. And I like what Lauren was talking about is maybe he knows something that they don't, right? He's perhaps more moral than they are. He's more knowledgeable than they are. So he has something that they don't have, which of course is enlightenment. But we haven't really talked about what is enlightenment, right? So that's the question is, what does the Buddha have that the gods don't have? What does he have that the gods want? But from the very beginning of Buddhism, it's clear. He is this higher position than the gods themselves. And if we think about the caste system, right, which we'll talk about in your exam, this is totally upending the caste system, right? But rather than writing a story about how it gets put back into place, the Buddha keeps it torn apart, keeps it upside down. And in fact, figures that we read about, like Ambedkar, who was in that book about caste, he converts to Buddhism, right? A lot of the Dalits look to Buddhism as a way to kind of regain their dignity. So if you felt like all of the caste system and patriarchy of Hinduism was a little oppressive, Buddhism might be a bit more your style. Okay, other things. So yeah, we've got the Buddha Dharma, and then finally Sangha. We won't talk about this as much, but it's good to know because they are often listed this way. The Sangha is the Buddhist community. It's just the followers of Buddhism, the monks and nuns, the lay people, and again, we'll get to them in a little while. We have 20 minutes, so yeah, that's plenty of time to go through the life of the Buddha. Very simply put, there are a lot of details to this story, but the Buddha was a prince, right? He was born as a prince, and there was a prophecy. Prophecy. So what, I guess, first of all, what is a prophecy? Chat, what's a prophecy? You guys have been quiet.
The story, like that, it says what's gonna happen, and it eventually happens.
Okay, I like that. It's a story. It's maybe we could say it's a prediction, right, about what will happen, and it does often happen. Do you know any Any other stories that begin with a prophecy? It's sort of old school, right? Not a lot of like Netflix shows start with prophecies, but in the old days, tons of stories do, right? Fairy tales, Greek tragedies. There's a very famous Greek tragedy, Oedipus Rex. You guys know that one? It is. He stabs his eyes out. Why does he stab his eyes out? Yes, something like that. And then you get the Oedipal complex. Have you ever heard of that? It's a Freudian thing. But anyway, so the story goes, Oedipus is the name of the character. He's born. There's a prophecy that he will murder his father and have children with his mother. And the parents hear this and they're like, "Oh, crap! we gotta get rid of this kid, right?" They don't want that to happen, and so they don't want to kill their own child because that would feel wrong. So they let the gods decide, right? They put the kid out in the elements, up on a hill, and they just say, "Okay, we're gonna leave this kid here. If he dies, he dies. If he lives, he lives." But they assume that he's gonna die. But then some shepherds come along. They find the kid. They take care of the kid. He grows up. Of course, he eventually encounters his father, kills his father. Then there's the riddle of the Sphinx. That's a part of this story. He solves the riddle of the Sphinx. He becomes the king. He marries his mother. He has children with her, just like the prophecy said. And the final scene, spoiler alert, is when he discovers that his mother was in fact his mother, that she's his wife now. He tears his eyes out. Yeah. So, and I think she was like blessed to stay young forever or something like that. So, it's a little fantastical, but again, we have this prophecy, right? And by trying to suppress the prophecy, it ended up coming true. If Oedipus had stayed home, maybe none of this would have happened. So anyways, coming back to the life of the Buddha, we also have a prophecy. What is the prophecy? He will be either a universal emperor or a great religious teacher. What will decide his fate? Maybe I'll change the question because it sounds like that's a detail that you guys missed. But his father is a king, right? He's a prince. What do you think his father wants him to do? His father wants him to become king, right? So his father tries to keep him at home, keep him comfortable, just keep all the sufferings of life away from him. Does that sound familiar? Is that how you guys grew up? Obviously, suffering has a way of breaking in. So it's a little bit, just like Oedipus Rex, it's a little bit of a fantastical tale. But the way it goes is, I guess I'll say first, the prophecy is that if he leaves home, he'll become this great religious teacher. If he stays at home, then he will become the universal emperor. So his father tries to make home as comfortable as possible, make his son as happy as possible, give him everything that he could ever want. And in doing so, his hope is that his son will kind of follow in his footsteps and become this powerful king. Now, as we all know, that is not what happens. So let's check it out. Here's a scene from a movie. Oops. 1 second. Pivotal scene in the story, right? We've got young prince, comfortable life, everything's happy, everything's comfortable. He can hang out with his friends all the time. There's no pandemic bothering him. It's almost like he's under quarantine constantly, but it's in like the best quarantine spot, right? He can play games with his friends. Everybody's there together. It's like living in the NBA bubble, but forever, at least for his entire youth. And but eventually he wants to leave the castle, and what we saw in that scene is the moment he left the castle. The scene is called The Four Sights. We only saw one of them there. So what did he see? What was the sight that we saw in the film just a moment ago?
The old men being taken away.
He saw old people. Yes. Why was he so surprised by old people? Chana. So Chana is the name of his charioteer. He says, Chana, what is wrong with those men? And maybe, forgive the brown face in the film. It's from like 1992 or something. They hired Keanu, and they gave him brown face, and he had a bad Indian accent. He had never seen old people before. Yeah. Why? I guess, first of all, have you guys seen old people before? Yeah. Grandma and grandpa walking down the street, old people all over the place, right? So it's sort of a ridiculous idea, isn't it? That somebody had never seen old people before. But it's almost like because of the prophecy, right? Because his father had kept old people away from him his entire life, that it really left an impact on him, right? So why was he so surprised? I remember the story from high school. Yeah, it's a good story. Why was he so touched? What was so disturbing to him that made him have to chase after these old people? So yeah, but why does he care? Why is he so like, he's curious? It's not only curiosity though. Well, I think you're on the right track here. He's worried about himself, right? Why is he worried about himself? What just happened? Something clicked in young Keanu's mind. He's not going to be young forever. He will get old one day. That's what he just saw, the toothless old man, gangly and weird, wrinkly skin. Have you ever touched an old person's skin before? It's all like veiny, and there's no springiness to it. You know, if I like pinch my skin, it kind of goes back to it. With an old person, it just sort of dangles out. You know, it's like there's no tenacity to it. And so, yeah, he sees these old people and he thinks, "Oh my God, I'm gonna get old one day." Have you guys ever had this realization? Have you? When did you realize you're gonna get old one day? It's sort of an interesting question, right? And it doesn't always hit you all at once, but it's hitting Keanu all at once because it's a story, right? But it does. This is a real thing that happens, right? The day comes where you say, "Oh my God, I'm getting old." And you guys are all young, so maybe you don't know this, but I'm getting old. I'm getting old, guys. I'm getting old. So what? I guess let's keep it hypothetical. What kind of things could happen to somebody where they have this realization? A car accident. Interesting. I don't know if that's about getting old as much as just I am vulnerable and can get hurt, right? But it's true that there's a similar sort of fear, anxiety that comes along with it.
Hangovers.
Hangovers, that's an interesting one. Sorry, what were you saying, Lauren? Your body aches more. Yeah. Have you guys ever gotten injured playing sports, so you go for a run and your body starts to hurt? Depression is an interesting one. I think depression kind of comes from this realization that you get old. Back pain, yeah, you get aches and pains in weird places that you didn't used to have. And it's true, especially even if you do exercise, but especially if you don't exercise, that sort of stuff catches up with you pretty quick. And similar to the car accident comment, you know, this sense of getting injured, right? There's a sense that your body just starts to fall apart eventually one day. You're closer to death, yes. And so as we think about, you know, what is Keanu going through right now? You know, seeing your first gray hair. I mean, the fact that you have to, as a man, I have to shave. That was sort of an exciting moment, but it's also growth, change, right? Transformation. Getting married, having kids, right? These are all parts of getting older. Once you do these things, there's sort of no going back, right? After you're married and have kids, the next big step really is death. And we think about what are these 4 sights? Maybe we can list them out. What are the 4 sights? So one is an old person. Even if you didn't do the reading, what do you think? What else does he see? It's the same sort of conversation. Can you tell from this image? They're not actually all here. I think there might be another image that comes along with it. Sickness, so he sees an old person, sick person. Harrison says poor person. We're going to talk about that in a second. There's one more. We've already sort of guessed it. Dead person, exactly. Old age, sickness, and death. And so again, it's a little bit of a ridiculous story, but this is the point, right? This is kind of the moral of the story, just like the blind man and the elephant, right? It's a little bit of a ridiculous story, but there's a kind of a powerful lesson that comes from it. In all of our lives, the moment will come where we encounter these three sites, right? And we don't usually encounter them, right? We have a pretty sophisticated society where if you start to get sick, you stay out of the public sphere, right? You take your class from home. If you get real sick, you go to the hospital. And almost always, right, with the exception of violent death and accident, most people die at the hospital, right? Death is kept away from us. You know, it's a disturbing topic. It's morbid. It's sort of scary. It's not fun to talk about. It makes us sad. And same with disease. And, you know, one of the difficulties of COVID is we have to stare all of these things in the face, right? Just like Keanu is in that movie we just watched. So we got three of them: old, sick, dead, right? Birth, aging, sickness, and death. Birth is sometimes added too. But here, why is there a monk here? What's up with that? How do we make sense of this? He sees old age for the first time. He's like, oh no, I'm gonna get old one day. He sees a sick person, like a really sick person. He's like, oh no, I'm gonna get sick one day. He sees a dead person.
It's part of the prophecy
It's part of the prophecy. Okay, could you say more?
that he might turn into a monk
Yeah.
or something similar.
Yeah. Well, it's sort of a weird group. So just so we're all clear, the four signs or the four sites. I like sites better, but Keon says signs is old person, sick person, dead person, and then we can say holy person or a monk, right? Somebody who's meditating. What does the monk or the meditating person have to do with the other three? Why does that matter? He sees the sick person, all these people suffering, going through all these difficult times, and then he sees this guy. And what does he think? Right? It's sort of, again, a ridiculous scene, but he's meditating right next to a dead body. Is he scared of death right now, this monk? No, he's at peace, right? Keanu is freaking out. Siddhartha is freaking out. He's like, oh my God, I'm gonna die one day, right? But then he sees this guy, he's like, whoa, what's he doing? He seems pretty calm. He seems pretty chill. He seems pretty relaxed, right? And so just like Simone said, this is part of the prophecy. He wants to know what that guy's doing, right? He wants to find out, how can somebody live in this world of death and disease, old age, suffering? How can somebody live in this world of suffering and still maintain their composure? And this is a question we have to deal with every day, right? Somebody wrote about depression above. You know, it's very easy to get caught up and overwhelmed by what Keanu is battling here, right? It's presented in sort of this ridiculous fashion. But again, this is something we all have to think about, right? The easier thing is to do what he did as a young man and sort of push it out of the castle, out of our lives. But the reality is it will come knocking. It will come knocking, right? There's not a question if, it's just when, right? The question is when. And so Keanu wants to take the bull by the horns and see what this meditator is doing. Is he casting them out? Well, as a young man, they were casted out, but he is embracing them, right? So we're actually hitting 1 o'clock. Why don't we leave it as a cliffhanger? And so if you did not read the whole story, this will give you a reason to check it out. How does that sound? Any last questions or thoughts on the 4 signs or the 4 sites? I will probably call them the 4 sites just because I feel like that's a nicer thing to call them. Yeah, any last questions about this? So we'll come back to it. We'll start next class with this. Oh, and I should say too, I won't be able to come in on Thursday. I have a dentist appointment during class time. So I'll pre-record a lecture for you where I'll cover the rest of the story. I'll cover the reading for Thursday, and then we can discuss this and all the rest next week on Monday. How's that sound? Is that cool? All right, so let's shift gears to the exam, shall we? So first of all, something to think about is preparation, right? So this exam, it came at the end of a pretty long amount of time, right? We've been studying for many weeks. There's a lot of information that we've studied over the long term. So one question is just how do you prepare over the long term? A second question is how do you prepare over the short term, right? So long term is like, are you doing the reading? Are you coming to class? Are you participating, right? That's one set of questions. Short term is more like review sheet, organizing notes, and getting ready for the exam itself. The other thing is there are two different kinds of questions, and you might wonder what sort of skills are being tested exactly. So, I give you this quotation, there's certain reading skills, but then also you have to kind of know the story, right? So if I gave you a quotation about seeing an old man and being disturbed by it, you have to know that story of the Buddha encountering the old man. So those are also skills you need to know. And then the short essay are more analytical, just like the forum post that we saw. I think many of you were able to do some of these things well, but I'm not even say few, only some students were able to do all of them well. Oh, this is coming, okay, hi. So looking forward, something we can think about is how can I develop these skills, right? How can I do these things better? Because there will be another exam down the line. All right, so here are some statistics. Maybe you're familiar with a bell curve, right? You guys know about bell curves? That's the thing that sort of looks like a bell, right? Statistics. So a lot of the time for an exam, it should kind of look like a bell curve. We actually have a little mini one almost going on here, but there's something kind of bizarre happening here, right? We got two big chunks at the A+ and the A range. We got one big chunk at the B- and one big chunk down here at the end. And to me, it represents sort of three different levels of preparedness for this exam. Just to be clear, there are 14 students who got either an A or an A+. A+ is 98 or above, so 100%, 99%, 98%. 7 students, right? So that's, you only missed one fraction of a question. An A is 94, 93 and above, I should say. A-, cutoff is 92, and that reflects on downward. So what I see here is a lot of you guys are like on task on the bus, so to speak, right? You're paying attention, you know what's going on, you're checking out the slides, you're reading the book. Actually, Mario said his major piece of advice is to try to enjoy the reading, which I thought was great advice, because then it no longer is a matter of only success, it becomes a matter of pleasure as well. Imagine that. Some folks in the middle, I would say this is the sort of student that maybe doesn't know totally what's going on, but is good enough at looking things up during an exam that they can kind of fake it, right? And I found a lot of answers that very clearly came from websites. And as I told you, it would make me sad. And of course, it does make me sad because it shows me that not only are you not really paying attention in class, but you also are a cheater and looking things up on the internet when I asked you not to, which again makes me sad. I didn't penalize you for points. I'll let you, win this round, but for how long will you win is the question. And then of course, some people just didn't do it, are not on the bus. And I even gave some pity points, right? You might be thinking if you ran out of time and couldn't do those last questions, 20 points is a big hit, and it really is. So I decided to give 10 free points for people who just didn't have time to answer those questions. But even with pity points, people are still getting D's and F's. And frankly, I don't know what to say. I think a lot of it comes back to these questions of especially in the long term, did you read, did you come to class, did you participate, or are you, with online learning, I don't know what the hell you guys are doing, or are you just kind of leaving it in the background? And then short term, you gotta download the notes, you gotta download the slides, I should say, you gotta compile your notes, because if you don't do that, you are just totally disadvantaged when it comes to the exam. So from an exam design perspective, what this says to me is this was too easy. Actually, these numbers are different, 2 7s. Maybe something switched. Oh, actually, I think I know what happened. Yeah, so anyways, but it was actually 15 students got A's. I think I left one out. It was actually 8 students who got A pluses. So lots of students did extremely well on this exam, and it sort of trails off. What I frankly want to see is none of these. I don't want to see any D's and F's. I want to see fewer A's and more B's, right? Not because I don't want you guys to succeed. I do want you to succeed, but I also don't want it to be too easy, right? Where everybody's just rolling through and getting A's on everything. So from a design perspective, I think this was actually too easy of an exam. Can we pretend it was moderate to difficult? Okay, yeah. Well, I'm just giving you the stats here, guys. If I just came out of nowhere and read this graph, I would say half the class getting A's is actually too many. Again, 35 students, so this is 2 classes combined. The mean was 85, that's the average. The median was 87. So actually those numbers are pretty good, but the only reason they are as low as they are is because of what's happening down here. So those are the numbers. Let's look at the exam questions. Where's my, there it is. One second. And so if you haven't seen your scores, you can see them now. You got to open this menu and go to the grade book. Should be around there for you. You might be able to see it. I'm actually not positive what this looks like for you, but you might be able to see it too just by clicking here. All right, so we can go through my preview, which I just used to check it. And so we have 13 minutes. So I'll try to go through all of these. If there's anything you want to go into more detail about, I'm happy to do that too. So the perfect man takes a false step. This is, almost everybody knew this was from the Ramayana, which is great. Not everybody knew who the perfect man was. And I thought this was just a total like softball, like we talked about this in a lot of detail in class. And of course it is Rama. Rama is the perfect man. He's the avatar of one of the highest gods, right? So of course he's the perfect man. Some people wrote the Sanskrit for the word perfect man, which of course, again, is a sign that you're just Googling Ramayana perfect man, which really, again, breaks my heart. And so what is the moral slip? That is a harder question. You have to actually know the story of the book to answer that question, which is that he shot Vali in the back. Most people got it because, again, we covered it in a lot of detail in class. This one is about caste. Most people could say it's from caste. It's Isabel Wilkerson. I didn't take points off if you were a little bit off or whatever. I was very generous in grading this. But this is the hard part. If someone can act their way out of it, it is class. If they cannot, it is caste. And most people could explain it. I wanted to know a bit more though, right? So if you said you're born into your caste, therefore you cannot act out of it, that's fine. If you just kind of repeated, if you can act out of it, it's class. You can't, it's caste. It doesn't really tell me anything. So you needed to give me something, right? Most people say class is based on economics. Caste is based on scripture, right? I liked that. It's also based on other social constructions like race, because race, of course, is a social construction. And so anyways, as long as you gave some reasoning, people talk about endogamy, heritability, that was even better, but you didn't have to do that. As long as you said something to explain your reasoning. Again, a lot of people miss this one because it's what are these 3 things in this passage? And it's very clear, he's going up to see the gods. Dharma, artha, and kama are embodied, right? Usually success, duty, success, pleasure are not embodied, right? So you needed to give me something about that, right? If you gave me duty, success, pleasure, you got most of the points. I think you got 1.5 out of 2.5. But if you didn't get that they were embodied as gods, then I took 1 off. Most people probably missed that, to be honest. I think that was the one that most people missed because they thought they knew what it was, but they didn't actually pay close attention to what is happening there. So anyways, what were the consequences? Artha, let's start with Kama. His wife left him, right? And so pleasure was gone from his life. And then Artha, he became very greedy, remember? And he stole from the Brahmins and then they killed him. So what was the moral of the story? Bottom line is, if you pursue duty as the highest one, that's great, but you can't ignore the other 2, right? And again, most people remember that. Some people didn't quite remember that, and I might have taken a point or 2 off. Since when can you be the matchmaker? So this is Tevye talking to Model. Most people knew that. Why is he surprised? I was a little disappointed by some of these explanations too. It's like, because Model is poor. Well, maybe because Model loves his daughter. Yeah, kind of, but it's really, you had to go into some of the expectations, right? It was expected that the father would arrange the marriage for the daughter, which is really what that story was all about. Yeah, exactly. It goes against tradition. So you had to tell me what is the tradition that it's going against, because when you gave something like, yeah, he loves the daughter, yeah, he's sort of poor, it's mostly there. I may have taken a point off, I may not have, I kind of forget. But in any case, what I really wanted to say was that, or what I wanted to see is that this was going against tradition. Most people missed it, so I think I gave full points, even if you wrote something like he was poor and he wanted to marry the daughter. Okay, if it was more vague than that, though, I definitely took a point off. Not more than will be measured in 3 feet. So this is Vishnu, right? Vishnu as the dwarf, as the short, small Brahmin. Any version of that is fine. Some people call him the visitor. That's fine. To whom did he say it? Mahabali, right? Some people just wrote Bali, which made me think they probably got it from the internet. Some people wrote his name was Vamana, which is also true, but it's not written in the book. So again, when you're pulling in information from the internet, it might be true, but it's not from the book, and you're just showing me that you're looking things up on the internet, which again makes me sad. What were the consequences of this? You had to give me something about the 3 steps, right? All of earth, all of heaven, 1 step on the head. If you missed some detail of that, I probably took a point off. So again, the best answer is Vishnu Mahabali, step over earth, step over heaven, step on his head. Agni, god of fire. This is from the Rig Veda, right? We read a whole verse dedicated to Agni. This one's a little bit hard, but of course you can, again, search through the slides to find it. Most of you are able to do that. And most, I'm not gonna say most, but many people looked up stuff like he has 7 tongues and he rides on a ram. Again, very clearly pulled from the internet. Very sad for me to read that. It's mostly something we talked about in class. We saw it in a video, right? And we saw Sita sacrifice herself or offer herself up to Agni, and he sort of brings her back, right? It's just, you put things in a fire and it goes up into smoke, up to the gods. And then he might even come back down and bring something back for you as a gift, right? So this is all part of the sacrifice, ritual sacrifice that we talked about toward the beginning of the unit on Hinduism. Here's Rama talking to Sapanika, right? And some people called her Kamavali, which is fine. That was also her name in that scene. I didn't want to confuse you by giving you both names, so I just called her Sapanika the whole time. But technically, it's also Kamavali, which again is fine. How did this end? You could say a few different things. It basically had to be something about Rama rejecting her, right? Rama rejecting her, Lakshmana mutilating her trying to fight with Sita. Any combination of those are fine. I just wanted to make it clear that Rama liked her at the beginning, and then he ultimately rejects her, right? So that was basically what the question was covering. But again, there were sort of a few different ending points that people cited, and any one of them would have been fine. Here we've got Vali talking to Rama, and the speaker is saying this because he feels blessed by having this exchange with Rama. It's a really weird moment. He was just shot, right? And so, if you mention that he was just shot, that's sort of important information. But also that Rama is this divine being, right? He's the perfect man. He is God incarnated, and the fact that he had this encounter with him without even having to ask for it, without having to call his name, Rama, right? Some people just chant Rama to ask for blessings. He was very touched and excited by that. Okay, maybe before we do the next one, any questions about all those, 1 through 8? If you have questions, feel free to email me, because I had to grade a pretty big number, I guess 35 exams. So if you're confused about the grade you got and you want to talk to me about it, I'm happy to talk. We could set up an appointment to talk. I could help explain why points were deducted the way they were. So yeah, just take a look and let me know. And then finally, this last, question, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say that this is something unrelated, but ever since you told us about the number 4 and how it means bad luck, I've been very scared to look at like 4:44, like the time. And now I'm like, I try to not see it, but now it's like, I can't help it.
Well, maybe I can free you from the curse, because it only means, so the number 4 is associated with death in Chinese because they're pronounced the same way. Si, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, si. And to say somebody died is also sila, right? And so in English, though, for and death are very different words. And so, they don't have to necessarily be reminiscent of each other. And as we saw in Buddhism, thinking of death maybe not the worst thing to do. Sometimes we have to think of death. So I free you from the curse, Simone. You need not worry about the number 4.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
I needed that.
And actually, number 8 is very lucky in Chinese. So if you want to look for a good number, number 8 is very.
Yeah, and I live on the 8th floor,
There you
so
go.
I've been also looking for number 8.
Well, yeah, there you go. So you live on a lucky floor. You're covered. Okay, real quick, 4 minutes. So bottom line is I asked you to write 2 short essays. Almost everybody did that, so I'm glad that didn't confuse anybody. This first one I underlined in the United States. Basically, it was just, did you read Wilkerson and or listen to the podcast and or put that into conversation with Doniger? Kind of a hard question, right? Because it's a lot of different pieces coming together. But a lot of you stepped up to the task, right? So double vision, pretty straightforward, insider perspective, outsider perspective. It's actually complicated though. There's a lot of things you could do with it. I didn't love the answers that said, some people say slavery is good. Other people say slavery is bad. Who knows what the answer is, right? Because that I would disagree with. Slavery is bad, right? But the more sort of thoughtful answer is like, by understanding the mechanisms by which slavery was created and perpetuated within our society, we can better dismantle it. I think that's a pretty good answer, right? So anyways, it was pretty open. If you could bring in some detail about how slavery works, or how the caste system works, I should say, in America, and how, we can look at it from multiple perspectives and why that matters, then you got full points for that. The second one about marriage, a lot of people got this backwards. I was really confused. So, what is Tabby the Dairyman really about is it's initially duty-based marriage, right? Hey, Laser Wolf, marry my daughter, you'll take care of her, everything's good, right? But then there's sort of it turns it on its head. It says, no, Saito doesn't love him. She wants to marry the poor tailor. They marry for love. And so what is love in this formulation is pleasure, right? It's not duty, it's pleasure. So Tevi the Dairyman is all about marrying for love, which is what we do in our modern society, isn't it? For most people, at least. Of course, not everybody does that. Ramayana, on the other hand, is all about duty, right? They followed the duty when they initially got married. They had to kind of Rama had to sort of win the fair maiden's hand by doing the archery stuff, stringing the bow and whatnot. And even more interesting, some people talked about the king Dasarata, duty, success, pleasure in his example, or when I think the most telling example is when Sita puts herself in a flame, right? And Rama rejects her by saying, hey, I've saved you, I've done my duty, but I don't want to be with you anymore because it's against my principles, right? And so that's really, it's not because he wasn't attracted to her, it's not because he didn't like her, it's because he wanted to put his duty above his pleasure, right? So that's what I was looking for. Most people got some version of that, but maybe missed a point or two from the details. And then finally, this one, Vali Ravana, on the very last day of class before the exam, I hammered it pretty hard, right? Is that this is all about caste. There's no other way to think about it. Rama is higher than the monkey, so he can do whatever he wants. He's lower than Ravana, so he has to show respect. And, he basically commits a very similar act. He kills both of them, but in drastically different ways. And you had to say the word caste, right? You had to say that the monkey was lower than Rama, that Rama was a prince, that Ravana was a Brahmin, and that really is the only way to make sense of this conflict. And so, yeah, these are, of course, the same questions. So, 1 minute left. Any questions about those essay questions? Is that pretty clear? Okay, so we're done with the exam then. And now, if some of you didn't get the grade that you wanted and you're wondering, how can I pull myself out of this pit? Mario started us off at the beginning of class saying it's never too late, right? And so I agree with him. There will be extra credit opportunities. I'll announce them next week. There will be a forum post next week, right? And so how do you get back on the horse? Start with a forum post, write a good one, do the reading, come to class, participate. When I'm like, please, somebody answer this question for me. Do me a solid, right? And then you do yourself a solid. So anyways, that's my advice. If you want to set up an appointment to talk about your exam or talk about study habits or anything else, send me an email. I can't meet Thursday, but I could meet as soon as next week. So just let me know. I'm available. Any last questions?
Not